Tunisia, March 1943, and the darkness wraps around everything like a heavy blanket. Obergefreiter Hans Weber is crouched low in his foxhole, his rifle resting across his knees, and all he can do is listen. The Afrika Korps has been fighting in North Africa for 2 years now, and Weber knows every sound the desert makes at night. The wind whispers across the sand, vehicles rumble in the distance, and sometimes you can hear British patrols moving through the darkness. But tonight feels different. Tonight the silence is too complete, too perfect, like the desert itself is holding its breath. Even the wind has stopped. Weber's hands tighten around his Mauser rifle because something is wrong. About 30 meters to his left, Corporal Dietrich is supposed to be at his post. To the right, Private Kessler. They're all strung along this defensive line south of Medenine, waiting for Montgomery's 8th Army to make its move. Then Weber sees them. He doesn't hear them first, he sees them, and that's what makes his blood run cold. For shapes are moving through the darkness, staying low to the ground, impossibly quiet for soldiers. Weber's breath catches in his throat because these men are small, much smaller than the British troops he's been fighting for months. They move like shadows, like they're part of the desert itself, born from the sand and the night. One of them passes within 10 meters of Weber's position, close enough that he could reach out and touch him if he dared. Weber doesn't move. He can't move. Every instinct is screaming at him to fire his rifle, to shout a warning to his comrades, but something deeper keeps him frozen in place. These small soldiers move with a confidence that absolutely terrifies him. They know he's here. Weber is certain of it. They know exactly where he is, and they've decided he's not worth killing yet. The shapes disappear into the darkness toward the German lines, and Weber sits there in his foxhole, his heart pounding so hard he thinks they must be able to hear it. 5 minutes later, the screaming starts. Weber learns 3 things that terrible night. First, Corporal Dietrich is dead, his throat cut so precisely and quietly that he never made a sound, never had a chance to warn anyone. Second, these small soldiers are called Gurkhas, and they come from mountains in Nepal so high that the snow never melts, places Weber has never even heard of. Third, the war in North Africa has just become very different, and nothing will ever be the same again. 6 months earlier, back when the war seemed simpler, German intelligence officers in Tripoli had been compiling detailed reports on all the forces they would be facing as Rommel pushed deeper into Egypt. The assessments were methodical and clinical, the way military reports always are. British infantry were well trained and disciplined, but predictable in their tactics. Australian troops were aggressive and excellent in defense, but prone to frontal assaults. South African units were mechanized, modern, and effective in open terrain. And then, almost as an afterthought at the bottom of the page, there was a mention of Indian divisions. The intelligence summary was dismissive in a way that would later seem almost criminally negligent. Colonial troops, it noted with casual arrogance, recruited from subject peoples, likely to have morale problems, limited education, may break under sustained pressure. The report devoted more space to analyzing British tank specifications than to the tens of thousands of Indian soldiers already in theater, already preparing to fight. Hauptmann Friedrich Müller, reading these reports in his command tent outside Tobruk, had nodded in agreement with everything he saw. He had fought in Poland and in France, and he knew what real soldiers looked like. They were tall, well-fed Germans, or at least they were Europeans. The idea that small men from Asian mountains could match German infantry in combat seemed absolutely absurd, almost laughable. The first German soldiers to encounter Gurkhas in actual combat were part of the 21st Panzer Division probing British positions near Sidi Barani in December 1941. The action was supposed to be minor, just a reconnaissance in force, nothing too serious. A German infantry company advanced on what appeared to be a lightly held position, expecting an easy victory. Instead, They found it defended by a company of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Gurkha Rifles, and nothing would ever be the same. Lieutenant Klaus Zimmermann led that assault, and his after-action report filed 3 days later was notably different in tone from all the previous assessments. The enemy soldiers, he wrote in careful handwriting, were approximately 160 centimeters tall, much shorter than expected. They wore British uniforms and carried British weapons, but they fought with a ferocity and determination he had not previously encountered in any theater of war. They did not withdraw when flanked by superior numbers. They did not surrender when surrounded and cut off. In one instance that Zimmermann described in detail, a wounded Gurkha soldier with both legs shattered by machine gun fire continued firing his rifle until he was killed, never once calling for mercy or trying to surrender. The German company eventually took the position after hours of brutal fighting. It cost them 43 casualties to dislodge 78 defenders, a ratio that shocked every officer who read the report. Zimmermann's report concluded with a single line that would be repeated in various forms throughout German assessments for the rest of the war, passed from unit to unit like a warning. These are not colonial troops. But it was the night fighting that truly terrified the Germans and changed everything they thought they knew about warfare. The Gurkhas had been conducting night raids since their first days in British service back in 1815, more than a century of accumulated experience. It was a tradition refined over generations, passed from father to son, perfected in countless small wars and skirmishes. They moved in darkness like other men moved in daylight, completely at home in the shadows, and they carried a weapon that would soon haunt German soldiers' nightmares for years to come. The kukri. The kukri is a curved blade roughly 18 inches long, heavy at the tip where it needs to be, designed for a single purpose, to cut with maximum efficiency. In a Gurkha's hand, wielded by someone who has trained with it since childhood, it can remove a head with one stroke. German sentries began to be found at dawn, killed so silently that soldiers sleeping just 5 meters away had heard absolutely nothing. No struggle, no cry, no sound at all. Gefreiter Anton Richter, stationed near El Alamein in July 1942, wrote a letter home to his family that was later intercepted by British intelligence and filed in military archives. "We call them the little men from the mountains," he wrote in shaky handwriting. "They are no taller than boys. Some of them look like they should still be in school, but they fight like devils from hell. Last week they came into our lines at night while we were sleeping. We found 4 of our men in the morning, all dead, all with their throats cut from ear to ear. No one heard anything, not a shot, not a shout, not even a scuffle. The British send them to make us afraid, and I will be honest with you, it is working. I am terrified every night." The German response was to double the sentries on night watch, then triple them when that didn't work, then to keep entire squads on alert through the night, rotating every 2 hours to prevent exhaustion and maintain readiness. It helped, but not much. The Gurkhas adapted to every change in German tactics. If they couldn't reach the sentries silently anymore, they would probe the defenses instead, carefully map them out, report everything back to their commanders. The next night, a completely different section of the line would be hit, somewhere the Germans weren't expecting. By the time of El Alamein in October 1942, German intelligence had completely revised its assessment of Indian troops. A report dated October 15, 1942, circulated to all divisional commanders, noted in formal language that certain Indian units, particularly those designated as Gurkha battalions, should be considered elite troops equivalent to the best Germany had to offer. The report specifically recommended treating positions held by Gurkhas with the same extreme caution as positions held by British Guards divisions or German paratroopers. This was an extraordinary admission that few people understood at the time. The Wehrmacht did not casually compare colonial troops to its own elite forces, and yet here it was in black and white. The respect was born from accumulated experience, battle after battle, defeat after defeat. At Reassess Ridge in July 1942, the 2nd Battalion, 4th Gurkha Rifles held a critical position against repeated German attacks for 3 solid days and nights. When the position was finally overrun by overwhelming force, the Germans found that the Gurkhas had fought literally to the last man. Not a single prisoner was taken who wasn't wounded too severely to resist, and even some of the wounded tried to fight. At Medenine in March 1943, where Hans Weber had his first terrifying encounter, the 1st Battalion, 9th Gurkha Rifles conducted a night raid that penetrated 300 meters into German lines through heavily defended positions. They killed or wounded over 40 soldiers, destroyed 2 ammunition dumps that exploded spectacularly, and withdrew without losing a single man. The Germans couldn't believe it. The psychological impact was cumulative and devastating. German soldiers began to absolutely dread night duty when facing Indian divisions anywhere along the line. The darkness, which had once been an ally to German forces, became a source of pure terror. Every shadow might contain a small man with a curved blade. Every sound, or worse, every silence, might be the last thing you ever experienced. Oberleutnant Heinrich Brandt, commanding a regiment in Tunisia in early 1943, recorded in his personal diary an incident that captured the strange mixture of fear and respect that German soldiers had developed. A Gurkha soldier had been captured during a daylight action, wounded but still alive and defiant. Brandt visited him in the field hospital out of curiosity. The man was perhaps 22 years old, no more than 5'4", with a round face that looked almost boyish and innocent. He had been shot through the shoulder and had lost a significant amount of blood, but his eyes were still fierce and proud. Brandt, who spoke some English from his university days, asked him through a translator why he fought so fiercely for the British Empire, why he was willing to die for people who weren't even his own. The Gurkha's answer, translated carefully by a medical orderly, was simple and profound. "It is better to die than to be a coward." Brandt wrote in his diary that night, and his words were heavy with meaning. "This small man, who could be mistaken for a child at a distance, has more warrior spirit than half my regiment combined. We have been fooled by our own arrogance to underestimate these soldiers based on their size and origin. They are not fighting for the British Empire or for politics. They are fighting because they are warriors in the truest sense, and warriors do not surrender. Warriors do not break. Warriors do not fail." The respect went both ways, though the Germans discovered this in an unexpected manner that surprised everyone. After the fall of Tunis in May 1943, when the North African campaign finally ended, thousands of German soldiers became prisoners of war. Many were guarded by Indian units, including Gurkhas, and the interaction was remarkable. The German POWs, expecting harsh treatment or even revenge for the brutal fighting, were surprised to find their guards professional and in some cases almost friendly. A German sergeant named Otto Becker, captured near Enfidaville during the final retreat, later described his first encounter with Gurkha guards in a letter. He had been absolutely terrified, remembering all the stories of night raids and kukri blades and silent deaths. But the Gurkhas treated the prisoners correctly and fairly, even sharing their rations when supplies were short and everyone was hungry. Becker asked one of them through a translator why they had fought so hard, what had driven them to such ferocity. The Gurkha soldier smiled warmly and said something that Becker never forgot. "You are brave soldiers," he said through the translator. "We respect brave soldiers who do their duty. The fighting is over now, finished, done. Now we are just men trying to survive and go home." This distinction between the warrior in combat and the man in peace was fundamental to Gurkha culture, something the Germans were only beginning to understand. German soldiers, raised in a military tradition that also valued warrior virtues and honor, began to see the parallels. The Gurkhas weren't savages or mindless killers. They were professional soldiers who took their craft seriously and performed it with excellence. In battle, they were absolutely implacable and merciless. Outside battle, they were human beings with families and hopes and dreams. But the war wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. It moved to Italy, and everything became harder. The Italian campaign, beginning in September 1943, brought German and Gurkha soldiers into contact again, this time in terrain that heavily favored the defenders. Mountains, narrow valleys, fortified positions that had been prepared for months. The Germans, who were masters of defensive warfare, prepared elaborate positions along the Gustav Line, the Hitler Line, the Gothic Line. The Gurkhas, who came from mountains that made the Apennines look like small foothills, were absolutely in their element. At Monte Cassino in early 1944, the 1st Battalion, 9th Gurkha Rifles fought in some of the most brutal and bloody combat of the entire war. The slopes were steep, rocky, completely exposed to German fire from positions above. The Gurkhas advanced uphill anyway, sometimes crawling on their bellies, sometimes rushing from cover to cover, but always moving forward, never stopping. Gefreiter Ludwig Hartmann, defending a position above the Rapido River, watched a Gurkha attack develop one cold morning in February 1944. The small soldiers moved up the slope in short bounds, using every fold in the ground, every rock, every depression. German machine guns opened up with devastating fire. Men fell, rolling back down the slope. The attack continued without pause. More men fell, cut down by bullets. Still they came, climbing over the bodies of their comrades. Hartmann, who had fought on the brutal Eastern Front and thought he had seen everything war could offer, was deeply shaken. "They don't stop," he told his squad leader in a voice filled with disbelief. "You kill them, and they just keep coming up that hill. What kind of men are these?" His squad leader, a veteran of North Africa who had seen this before, didn't even look up from his machine gun. "Gurkhas," he said flatly. "Just keep firing and pray we have enough ammunition." The attack was eventually repulsed after hours of fighting, but at a cost that shocked the German defenders to their core. For every Gurkha killed, they had expended hundreds of rounds of precious ammunition. The small soldiers didn't present easy targets at all. They were trained from childhood in mountain terrain, taught to move like mountain goats. They could traverse slopes that seemed impossibly steep, find cover where none appeared to exist, and at night they absolutely owned the mountains. German positions throughout Italy were subjected to constant Gurkha night patrols that never seemed to stop. Not the large-scale raids of North Africa, but smaller, more focused surgical operations. A listening post would be hit and destroyed. A supply route would be interdicted. An observation post would be cleared out. Each operation was executed with precision and professionalism, and the Gurkhas would withdraw before German reinforcements could respond. The psychological strain was immense and unrelenting. German soldiers in Italy, already facing harsh conditions, dwindling supplies, and growing certainty of defeat, now had to contend with an enemy who could strike anywhere, anytime, and disappear like ghosts into the mountains. By late 1944, German intelligence assessments of Gurkha units had evolved dramatically from those early dismissive reports that seemed so foolish now. A document dated November 1944, captured after the war by Allied intelligence, described Gurkha battalions as elite mountain infantry, highly motivated, excellently trained in night operations and close combat, should be considered equivalent to German mountain troops in capability and determination. This was extraordinarily high praise coming from the Wehrmacht. German mountain troops, the Gebirgsjäger, were among the finest soldiers Germany had, veterans of Norway and the Caucasus. To place colonial troops from Nepal in the same category represented a complete reversal of every initial assumption, a total admission that everything they had believed was wrong. But individual German soldiers didn't need intelligence reports to tell them what they already knew from painful experience. Hans Weber, who had crouched in that foxhole in Tunisia and watched shadows move through the darkness, had survived somehow and fought through Sicily and up the Italian peninsula. He had his own assessment, written in a letter to his brother in December 1944, shortly before being seriously wounded at the Gothic line. "We were told these were inferior soldiers," he wrote with obvious bitterness. "We were told they would break easily under pressure, that they were only fighting because the British forced them to at gunpoint. Every single word was a lie. I have fought the Gurkhas for 2 years now across 2 countries. They are the finest soldiers I have ever faced in my life, and I have faced many. They are small, yes, shorter than us, but they are made of iron and fire. They do not know fear, or if they do know it, they never show it. When I see them coming across the battlefield, I know the fighting will be hard and men will die. I respect them more than I can say, more than I respect most of our own troops." The respect was earned through specific documented actions that became legendary among German troops and were whispered around campfires. In December 1944, during fighting along the Senio River, a Gurkha rifleman named Naik Agensing Rai single-handedly attacked several German positions, killing multiple defenders with his kukri and grenades. He was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest British military honor, and German survivors spoke of him with awe. Similar actions occurred throughout the Italian campaign with disturbing frequency. Gurkhas repeatedly conducted assaults that seemed absolutely suicidal on paper, but succeeded through sheer determination, tactical skill, and warrior spirit. At the Senio River in December 1944, the 1st Battalion, 6th Gurkha Rifles attacked heavily fortified German positions in a night assault that should have failed. The Germans, by now very experienced in fighting Gurkhas, had prepared extensive defenses. Barbed wire in multiple rows, minefields carefully mapped, interlocking fields of machine gun fire, illumination flares ready to light up attackers. The Gurkhas came anyway, because that's what Gurkhas did. They moved through the wire using Bangalore torpedoes to blast gaps, cleared paths through the minefields with careful precision, and were on top of the German positions before the defenders could fully respond to what was happening. The fighting was brutal and savage, hand-to-hand in some sections, men grappling in the darkness. When dawn finally came and the smoke cleared, the Germans had been pushed back 500 meters and their defensive line was broken. The German commander, assessing his casualties with growing horror, found that most of his losses had occurred in close combat at knife range. The Gurkhas, once they managed to close the distance, were absolutely devastating. The kukri, which German soldiers had initially dismissed as a primitive weapon from another era, proved terrifyingly effective in the confined spaces of trench warfare. Lieutenant Werner Schmidt, who survived that action through sheer luck, later described it to American interrogators after his capture in April 1945. "They are like ghosts from nightmares," he said, his hands still shaking slightly at the memory. "You hear nothing, you see nothing, and then suddenly they are among you with those curved knives. And that knife, that curved blade they carry, it is not just a weapon to them. It is a symbol of who they are. When you see it coming at you in the darkness, you know you are fighting men who have absolutely no fear of death." This absence of fear, or at least the appearance of it, was perhaps the most psychologically unsettling aspect of fighting Gurkhas. German soldiers were trained to be brave, to face death for the fatherland, to never surrender. But the Gurkhas seemed to possess a different quality entirely, not recklessness or stupidity, but a calm acceptance of danger that was almost spiritual in nature. It came from their culture, from centuries of tradition. Nepal, isolated high in the Himalayas, had maintained its independence through military prowess for hundreds of years. Gurkha men were raised from childhood with the expectation that they might become soldiers. It was considered an honor, a sacred duty, a family tradition passed down through generations. The British had recruited them since 1815, and over more than a century a warrior culture had been refined to an almost perfect edge. The motto of the Gurkha regiments was brutally simple and profound. Kafar Huna Banda Marnu Ramro. Better to die than be a coward. German soldiers, hearing this translated by prisoners or deserters, understood it immediately and viscerally. It was a sentiment they had been taught in their own military training, drilled into them from the first day of boot camp. But the Gurkhas lived it with an intensity and purity that was remarkable even by Wehrmacht standards, even by the standards of the SS. As the war in Italy ground toward its inevitable conclusion in early 1945, the German army was collapsing everywhere. Supplies were completely gone. Air cover was non-existent. Replacements were old men and teenage boys who barely knew how to hold a rifle. The soldiers who remained were exhausted, starving, and increasingly aware that the war was lost and Germany was defeated. But even in defeat, even in retreat, even in the final desperate days, German soldiers who had fought the Gurkhas remembered them with genuine respect and something close to admiration. In April 1945, as German forces in Italy began their final surrender to Allied forces, thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers found themselves being processed as prisoners by forces that included Indian divisions. The Gurkhas, who had fought so fiercely and killed so many, now served as guards and camp administrators. Obergefreiter Hans Weber, wounded badly at the Gothic line but recovered enough to walk with a limp, found himself in a POW collection point guarded by men from the 2nd Battalion, 7th Gurkha Rifles. He recognized their distinctive insignia immediately. This was the same battalion he had first encountered in Tunisia more than 3 years and a lifetime ago, when he had watched shadows move through the darkness. One of the Gurkha soldiers, a Havildar sergeant named Dil Bahadur, spoke some German that he had learned from prisoners over the years. He approached Weber, who tensed instinctively, remembering everything, the night raids, the silent killings, the fear that had haunted his dreams. Dil Bahadur smiled warmly, a genuine smile. "The war is finished now," he said in accented but clear German. "You fought well and with honor. Your soldiers were brave men. We respect that." Weber, caught completely off guard, could only nod mutely. "We are soldiers," Dil Bahadur continued, gesturing between them. "We understand what it means to be soldiers. You did your duty to your country. We did ours to our regiment. Now it is over and we can be human again." This moment, repeated in various forms across hundreds of interactions between German prisoners and Gurkha guards, captured something absolutely essential about who the Gurkhas were. They had never fought with hatred burning in their hearts. They had fought with professionalism, with pride in their craft, with loyalty to their regiment and their comrades and their tradition, but never with hatred for the men they were killing. German soldiers, raised in a system that emphasized ideology and racial superiority and hatred of enemies, found this profoundly confusing at first. How could these men, whom German propaganda had labeled as racially inferior, fight so well without hatred fueling them? How could they be so fierce and merciless in battle, and yet so professional and almost kind in peace? The answer was simple, though it took most Germans years to understand it fully. The Gurkhas were professional soldiers in the absolute truest sense of the word. They fought because it was their job, their tradition, their sacred honor. They fought to win, and they fought without mercy when combat demanded it, but they never fought because they hated Germans as people. They fought because they were warriors in the ancient tradition, and warriors fought when called upon. Over 250,000 Gurkhas served in World War II across multiple theaters. They fought in North Africa, Italy, Greece, Burma, Malaya, and anywhere the British Empire needed elite troops. They earned 10 Victoria Crosses, the highest number awarded to any Commonwealth force relative to their size, an astonishing achievement. They suffered over 32,000 casualties, including 8,985 killed in action, a staggering price paid in blood. The German soldiers who fought against them never forgot the experience for the rest of their lives. In the years after the war, as veterans from both sides slowly wrote memoirs and gave interviews to historians, a consistent theme emerged again and again. German soldiers who had fought the Gurkhas spoke of them with a respect that bordered on reverence, a tone they used for almost no other enemy. Oberleutnant Heinrich Brandt, who had interviewed the wounded Gurkha in that field hospital in Tunisia so long ago, survived the war and returned to Germany. He wrote his memoirs in 1962, and an entire chapter was devoted exclusively to the Gurkhas. "We were taught our entire lives that we were the master race," he wrote with obvious bitterness and regret. "We were taught that other peoples, especially those from Asia and Africa, were racially inferior to us. And then we met the Gurkhas on the battlefield, and we learned through pain and defeat that courage and skill and warrior spirit have absolutely nothing to do with race or nationality or ideology. They have to do with culture, with training, with tradition, with honor." The Gurkhas had all three in abundance, refined over centuries. They were quite simply superb soldiers, among the finest in the world. I am honored to have fought against such men, and deeply grateful that I somehow survived the experience. This sentiment was echoed by countless other German veterans in books and interviews. The initial shock of encountering soldiers who completely defied all their assumptions and propaganda. The growing respect born from repeated combat and accumulated defeats. The final acceptance that they had been catastrophically wrong about so much. Hans Weber, who had crouched in that foxhole in Tunisia and watched shadows move through the darkness and lived to tell the tale, survived the war and returned to a destroyed Germany. He rarely spoke about his experiences, the way many veterans of terrible wars chose silence. But in 1978, he gave a single interview to a local newspaper about his time in North Africa and Italy. The interviewer, a young woman who had never known war, asked him which enemy soldiers he had found most difficult to fight against. Weber didn't hesitate even for a second. "The Gurkhas," he said with absolute certainty. Without any question, the Gurkhas. They were small men from mountains I had never heard of before the war, fighting for a British Empire that was not theirs and did not represent them. But they were the best soldiers I ever faced in 6 years of war. Brave beyond measure, skilled beyond belief, absolutely fearless in combat. When I saw them coming across no man's land, I knew the fighting would be hard and brutal and men would die. And at night, he paused, his eyes distant, remembering things he had tried to forget. At night when darkness came, they owned the entire battlefield. We were just trying to survive until dawn arrived. The interviewer, sensing something important, asked if he had been afraid of them. Weber smiled, a sad smile that held decades of memory. "Every soldier is afraid," he said quietly. "Anyone who tells you otherwise is a liar or a fool. But yes, the Gurkhas terrified us in a way no other enemy did. Not because they were cruel or enjoyed killing. They were not cruel at all. They were professional. But they were so extraordinarily good at what they did, so skilled. And what they did, what they were trained to do, was kill German soldiers efficiently. They did it quietly, quickly, and without hesitation or remorse. That is truly terrifying." "Do you hate them?" the interviewer asked, expecting perhaps anger or bitterness. Weber shook his head slowly. "No, I do not hate them at all. I respect them deeply. They were doing their duty as soldiers, just as I was doing mine for Germany. They were simply better at it than we ever expected. Much, much better than anyone told us they would be. This respect, earned through years of brutal combat and paid for in blood, became the lasting legacy of the German and Gurkha encounters throughout World War II. The Germans had begun the war with arrogant assumptions about racial superiority and the inherent inferiority of colonial troops from Asia. The Gurkhas, through their actions in battle after battle, had shattered those assumptions completely and utterly. They had done it not through propaganda or speeches or ideology, but through the simplest and most undeniable method possible in human history. They had proven themselves in combat where it mattered most. They had fought with skill, courage, and determination that demanded respect, even from enemies who had been taught by their entire society never to give such respect to non-Europeans. The small men from the mountains, no taller than boys, had become giants in the eyes of the German soldiers who had faced them and somehow survived. Not through physical size or strength, but through warrior spirit that transcended nationality, race, empire, or politics. In the end, what German soldiers said about Gurkhas when they first encountered them evolved dramatically from dismissive assumptions to shocked surprise to grudging respect to genuine admiration. The journey from inferior colonial troops to the finest soldiers I ever faced was written in blood across the deserts of North Africa and the mountains of Italy. And in the darkness of countless nights, when German sentries stood their watch and heard nothing but felt the presence of shadows moving closer through the darkness, they learned a profound lesson that no intelligence report or propaganda sheet could ever have taught them. That courage and skill and warrior spirit are not the exclusive property of any single nation or race or ideology. They belong to those who earn them through dedication, training, tradition, and the willingness to face death without flinching or breaking. The Gurkhas had earned all of these things through more than a century of service, and the Germans, whatever else they believed about race and superiority, learned to recognize that fundamental truth through painful experience.